I'll give our quick mandatory disclaimer here. This webinar is for informational purposes only and should not be construed in any way as providing legal or any other professional advice. So now that we've got that out of the way, we can proceed.
Spoken like a true attorney, Will. Go ahead and introduce yourself, Will.
Oh yeah, so I'm Will Fletcher. I'm the general counsel here at Zasio. I like to joke my unofficial title is Legal Department of One, which just shows that I have the privilege of being able to work directly and regularly with every part of the company. Warren and I work together all the time on some of these privacy and cybersecurity issues related to software development, ensuring that we've got privacy and security by design built into our applications. I work closely with our consulting team on some of these issues as they come up, and also look at privacy, retention, and cybersecurity from an organizational perspective, making sure that, and in the sales negotiation process, making sure that our practices mean that we can comply with our commitments. So delighted to be here today and share a few of the things I've learned along the way.
Yeah, I'm really glad that we can do this together, Will, because you and I, as you mentioned, have worked a lot on the cybersecurity program. And if that sounds strange to those of you who have seen me do presentations before, you might know that I work with customers to help put together solutions, and I also kind of drive the product development life cycle, but all of that has sort of converged into cybersecurity as well, because of course you have to, as you mentioned, Will, have security by design, and that also flows into how we work with our customers and making things that are secure. And so about 3 years ago, I got certified as an information security manager to kind of add to the CRM. And that's part of the reason we're here today, is because we've been in all of those different worlds, and you have the privacy certification, and so you've got a lot of experience in that area. So we just thought it's a great topic to talk about how these things work together. But more on that later. We'll get into that in just a moment. So with that, just a little bit, if you don't know about Zasio, just a few quick hits here. We've been around for a long time. Kevin Zasio started the company in 1987. He is still the CEO and involved in all of the day-to-day activities. And he created the first full lifecycle records management software back in 87, actually probably in more like 86. So it was the first one to track both active and inactive records and things that are kept permanently or long-term. And then we added a consulting division in 1985 along. There we go. Bluetooth likes to cut out just when I'm getting started, but also added the records retention research tool in 1995 as far as part of that consulting process. And we are just known for doing things like this in education, as well as continuously innovating in the field of records management. So with that, Will, let's have you introduce the topic here and get us rolling.
Okay, so thank you, Warren, and we're talking today about the convergence of cybersecurity, privacy, and records and retention under information governance. So let's start by defining our terms and talk about what exactly is information governance. And to do that, I want to travel back in time for a sec to the days before IG, when we had just records management. All our records were paper documents, and the field of records management comes along to try to add order and consistency to some of the haphazard and chaotic ways that entities are handling their paper records, how they create them, store them, and dispose of them. So out of that, fast forward a few years, and computing comes along, and with the widespread adoption of computing, records management grows into RIM, records and information management. And so that recognizes that a lot of what was formerly physical records on paper are now being digitally maintained, and a lot of the information from those records is stored outside of what we traditionally thought of as a record in our networks, databases, and computing systems. And so you have this additional need to manage both information and records in both the physical and digital formats. And it's a largely administrative function, thought of as a backroom function, as a kind of a side product of the organization's main mission, whatever that may be. But years go by, and out of RIM blossoms IG, information governance. IG, I like to think of as RIM elevated. It's about being able to maximize the value you get from your records information while managing risks more than just simply the handling, retention, and disposition of records and information. It's often referred to as the mother of all collaborative efforts, and so involves a handful of interrelated concepts, three of which we're here to talk about today: security, privacy, and records and information management. And it's really about being able to manage your information from an organizational perspective. It's ultimately the responsibility of your senior leadership, and considered part of what drives the business forward, and not simply a necessary side function. So, within that collection of practices, RIM, privacy, and security are all part of the same thing, same team, working towards the same goal. And so we'll talk about how these three spokes of the wheel fit together, blend together, and how we can all work better together to accomplish our organizational goals. So let's first, Warren.
Want to have me jump in here?
Yeah, I'll pass it to you.
And one thought about what you were just saying is that in terms of elevated records management, it's sort of like bringing the basement to the boardroom, if you will, because it has raised the importance of it. So yeah, you might be wondering, out of the model that we just saw under information governance, that has a lot of components to it. Why have we picked just these three, the privacy, cybersecurity, records management, in terms of describing the convergence? And part of that is sort of born out of the fact that I know, at least in my conversations with customers and working towards solutions, I started to see a lot of crossover. So it was several years ago, as I was filling out RFPs and questionnaires and things, I started to notice that there were a lot more questions about security than there were about the records management functionality. So I kind of went, okay, what's happening here? The world is changing a bit, and so had to start diving into the security realm quite a bit more. And so that sort of built on top of the records and information management foundation. But then, not long after that, we started hearing a lot more talk about data privacy, and of course we have regulations that have come along, and so privacy became sort of a subset of cybersecurity with some of the various laws that we'll talk about in just a moment as well. And so part of it is just the fact that all of these different discussions have converged, they've come together, they overlap, and I think instead of talking about them as separate subjects, we wanted to bring them together as kind of more a holistic view of data governance, because it all relates to that information governance model that Will was just talking about. So with that, before we get too far afield, we want to take a quick user poll to talk about, or just to kind of get some input from you, the audience, on how this might work in your organization. So let me post this first poll up there. And this is basically talking about how much collaboration exists in your organization between these three disciplines. So I'll give you a few moments to answer that, and then we will share those responses. You thought you were going to be able to multitask during this process, but no, we're going to quiz you and make sure that you have some involvement here. Looks like it's a race between a couple of options here, and I'll give it just a couple more seconds to make sure we get a good participation rate. And all right, good. We're over the 70% mark, so that looks good. I'll go ahead and close that, share those results with you, so you can see that it's pretty good. It's actually higher than I expected on the upper end. So there's more people that are collaborating in this way than I expected. I especially am impressed by the number that shows for the mandated by policy that all of these work together. So that's great to see. Excellent. Well, let's go ahead and turn that off for the moment, and we'll go back to our slide deck. So, Will, maybe you can kind of kick off the discussion about the cybersecurity part, give us some background on kind of the essentials of that.
Okay, so let's talk about the bedrock of cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is fundamentally concerned with three things. We call it the CIA triad. That's your information confidentiality, its integrity, and availability. So we'll walk through each of the three. Confidentiality has to do with what you would expect, what you do to protect data secrecy within your organization. The goal here is to protect from unauthorized access, whether that's intentional, inadvertent, from both outside the organization and within. We think of a compromise of confidentiality as a breach, a data breach. And what typically comes to mind there is a hacker has infiltrated your systems, stolen data, encrypted data, but it can also be something less sinister, such as failing to protect your endpoint devices, leaving a laptop at a coffee shop that's not encrypted or has credentials taped to the keyboard, having paper
Don't do that.
files left in an unlocked car on the curb overnight, or even simply an inadvertent email sent to the wrong party outside your organization with a sensitive attachment. And so confidentiality deals with the collection of practices around making sure that your data remains secure. Integrity has to do with making sure your information is reliable and correct. And like all three of these concepts in the CIA triad, integrity is must be ensured from throughout the information lifecycle, from creation to disposition. It deals with making sure your information is trustworthy. It hasn't been tampered with. Availability is about ensuring consistent and ready access to your information to those who need it. So it's about making sure, say, your development team has access to your organizational trade secrets in a consistent, uninterrupted manner, giving them the data they need to do their development work, but at the same time making sure that maybe the marketing team doesn't have access to that same information. And in doing so, we preserve its confidentiality and integrity along the way. So all three of these fit together, blend together a bit. And that, in a nutshell, is what cybersecurity is all about. And CIA, supports good RIM habits. It supports privacy, and so it's something that all three spokes in that information governance wheel can get behind and work together to maintain. So, how does? Oh, go ahead.
Before you jump in, it just makes me think about if there are archivists in the audience, they might recognize things like integrity as being like the provenance of making sure that their archival collections, that they've been vetted in terms of their integrity, as far as photos not being doctored, documents not being falsified or forged, things like that, as well as just availability of records for a records manager. Yeah, I mean, making sure that records can be easily found and delivered to those who need it. That's all part of records management as well.
Very well put. So moving on a bit, let's talk about how cybersecurity and CAA happens. Your cybersecurity is mostly carried out using a framework. Chances are your organization has adopted one of the many frameworks that are out there and widely used, or builds its program off of a framework, which is just a collection of controls, practices, procedures, policies that govern how we maintain that CIA triad. And here's a list of a few examples that you've probably seen before. And you know, at Zasio, we're a service provider, a hosted service provider. So we've adopted SOC 2, which some will disagree that that's technically a framework, but it behaves and acts a lot like it, and we're audited against that every year to make sure that the controls and processes we have in place, that we're carrying those out and have the evidence to show that we're doing what we've represented we will do as part of our cyber framework. We've also tried to build our program off of the ISO 27001 and 2 standard, which looks at information security from a comprehensive perspective. It's a comprehensive written information and management system throughout the whole organization. That's just some background on your frameworks. And Warren, I will turn it back to you to discuss some core elements of cybersecurity.
Great, thanks, Will. So I've got a picture here of the entrance to a castle, because as I was thinking about the best way to convey what cybersecurity is, it seemed like the best analogy was it's like building a castle. You want something that's got strong fortifications to protect what's inside, things to prevent the bad guys from getting in. So you've got a drawbridge, maybe a moat, you've got maybe archers at the top on the turrets, defending the castle from marauding invaders. And so all of those things that just kind of create that image of what cybersecurity is as far as building up your defenses. But a lot of people think that it's just about protecting the outside from the guys coming in, trying to get into your system, and that of course is a big part of it. So doing the physical security part of it to make sure that no one's getting into your office or into your data center to steal things. Obviously, that's a huge part of it. So physical security becomes part of that framework that Will mentioned, and also of course network protection. So things like firewalls and other tools to keep the bad guys out of your network, so you can keep what's inside protected. That's of course a big part of what they do. But that's all kind of seen as the IT part of things, and just kind of the perimeter defenses. But we also have to think, okay, what if they do penetrate that perimeter? Then you have to make sure that your endpoints, your workstations and servers and so forth are protected. And that partly comes into play because you do have to let down the drawbridge to let people in, because you have to receive email, you have to go to websites, and all of that basically creates a connection between the inside and the outside. So you've got to make sure that when you do that, your processes there are protected through anti-malware and other types of things to protect your workstations. But that also ties into a larger discussion about vulnerability management, because it's not only what can impact your workstation, but it's also vulnerabilities that can be in commercial software that you use or software that you develop. So if you deal with open source software at all, you might know about the idea of many libraries embedded in other libraries, and you have to kind of follow that chain, the whole supply chain for how your software gets to be where it is, and be able to manage that vulnerability chain as well. And that sort of ties into the understanding of what you have in terms of physical and software assets. So you have to keep a systems inventory, making sure that all of your systems are patched, your software is up to date, you've got all the latest vulnerabilities patched in those systems. And so you have to really know the entire landscape of what makes up your IT infrastructure. But then you also have to assume that the bad guys will get in, and you have to protect the data and make sure that if someone does get in, either physically or through a network, that you encrypt the data. So it involves the data protection, retention of sensitive data, but also the ability to reproduce that data in case it does get stolen. So if someone steals a hard drive or infects your system with ransomware and everything gets encrypted, you've got to be able to recover that information from backups that haven't been infected. And so you've got to be able to provide that business continuity, both from attacks as well as disasters. And so it ties into that as well. And then also there's a lot of legal reporting requirements. In fact, a lot of people don't know that cybersecurity has a lot to do with policies and procedures and kind of the legal aspect of things. And Will, you know all about that because you had to write a lot of those policies for us, and you know about those reporting requirements as well. And of course, this all sort of ties into the general idea of risk management. So all of these things that we're doing is saying, well, how much risk can we take and how do we mitigate that? Because we could make everything perfectly secure, locking it all down, making sure that no one can get to it, but of course we can't get business done. And so we have to balance that need of, being able to do business, but making it so that we do it in such a way that we accept a certain level of risk, we mitigate what we can, we transfer what we can, and we get business done. So,
And
yeah.
Warren, I'd just like to add how much these core elements now in our digital age, where so much of our records and information are hosted in the cloud, how much these concepts extend beyond the four corners, the perimeter of your organization. Whereas,
Yeah.
it used to be, you were concerned with applying these principles to your office, your server room, with cloud services. A big element of this is making sure that your vendors are looking out for these things and
yeah, excellent point. Yeah.
Employing equal or better level protections to the data that exists outside of your organization that you would apply to it if it were still within the four corners of your company.
Absolutely. So Will, tell us a little bit more about data privacy.
Okay, happy to do that. So let's talk about what exactly is data privacy. Distinct from cybersecurity, although cybersecurity is a core component of data privacy, and it is the collection of practices that surround how we collect, use, process, share, and dispose of personal information, and that is any information that by itself or when combined with other information can be used to identify or tell us about an individual. So this is a subset of information that's in your larger records and information databases that relates or kind of creates a profile about a specific persons. And I'd like to talk about a subset of personal information we'll call sensitive PI, which is just that personal information that relates to things like religious practices, political affiliations, social security numbers, sexual orientations, sensitive things like that, while we owe a duty of confidentiality and transparency with respect to personal information, those duties are heightened when it comes to sensitive personal information, and the risks associated with that are elevated as well. So I think this all ties in together in where, and one area where RIM professionals, our privacy pros and security pros can work together is just mapping out exactly, and Warren's touched on this a bit, what information your organization is collecting, and within that, what PI is being collected, where you're storing that, how you're using that, and setting retention practices around not only your records and information, but the PI and sensitive PI within that. We have a very broad mixed audience today. So Warren, if you want to fast forward slides, and we're all familiar with the growing number of data privacy laws out there on the books, both in the US and internationally. And so we've covered those in other forums, the specific laws. So I want to just kind of take a step back and have a broader conversation about data privacy. And so if you're new to the area, I think one way to enter that realm into understanding the specific privacy laws is becoming familiar with your FIPS, your Fair Information Privacy Practices. These are principles that have been around for decades before any of our data privacy laws, and really have formed the foundation for all those various laws. There's a number of FIPS that are out there, but they're all very similar, have a high degree of overlap. And so we'll talk about a few of the fair information privacy principles, practices that are out there that will give you that foundation to then go forth and understand the specific privacy laws that apply to your processing and your organization. And so a few to highlight here is just this idea of transparency. The that you as a well, let me back up. One principle to highlight with privacy that contrasts to how we've typically thought about records management is, as an organization, our records information are ours. We're the owners of that. Where it comes to personal information, even though it's in your possession, you're using it. Think about it as still belonging to the data subject, the person from whom that information came or that it's about, and you are merely the custodian of that. And with that, the data subject still has, if not complete ownership, a handful of rights to direct how and control how you use and what you do with that information. And so the first principle is this idea of transparency, that as organization processing personal information, we have a duty to be transparent about our collection practices, what we're collecting, how we're collecting it, and what we're using it for, and also disclosing how long we expect to retain the personal information, and then when we'll dispose of it. Another FIP is the idea of collection limitation, that we will only collect the amount of personal data, types of personal data that we need, the minimum amount to accomplish the purpose that we've communicated to the data subject that we're collecting it for. Minimization, disposition, related concepts, except, we'll talk about on the back end. And this is a kind of a conflicting point with traditional RIM, where we often are faced with long retention periods or even retaining documents forever. With records, you will retain it, for a set period and agree not to dispose of it before then. With personal data and privacy, it's much shorter, and we're agreeing to dispose of it as soon as we've accomplished the purpose that we've collected it for. In many FIPS and in certainly the GDPR and SEM privacy structures, is the idea of consent, that you cannot collect the data from a data subject until you have the consent of the owner to access it. And contrast that to what we largely see in the United States is the opt-out principle, that as long as you're transparent that you're doing this, you're free to collect it, unless they've affirmatively said, we don't want you to collect that. Some data subject rights that are in our fair information privacy principles, the idea that the data owner has the right to access the personal information that you have on file. They have a right to know what exactly you have in relation to them, and if that's not true, the integrity has been let lapse, that you have an obligation to correct that. And then in certain circumstances, they have the right to require that you delete that data unless you have some sort of compelling or legal reason that you need to hang on to that. So those are our FIPS in a nutshell that just form the framework of how we think about personal data collection and processing, and are areas where there's room for a lot of collaboration with cybersecurity and our RIM professionals.
And, as you talk through that, Will, it makes me realize that information is very valuable, but it's also very risky, and it becomes more of a balancing act to hold those two together. So with that, I've got another poll question that I want to throw out to the audience that deals with privacy. So this is about how much data privacy has impacted your handling and management of data. Give people a few moments to jump in there. I would imagine there's not going to be a whole bunch of people that have not at all been affected, but we'll see. Could be some. Right now, it's looking like some pretty close ties in some of the areas, but that can often change as the results come in. All right, we're just over that 70% threshold, so I will close that in just a few more seconds and see how our results end. Okay. That looks good. We'll go ahead and close that. I'll share those results with you. And there you have it. So kind of right in the middle, we've got people that are making some changes, making progress. A lot of them have had to change a lot of policies. And gosh, a quarter of the results say that it's had a major impact on the organization. I'm not surprised by that in the least, but it's good to just get that confirmation. We did have a few there that have not been impacted at all. So it depends on the industry, of course. It depends on your role, so not overly surprising there. Great, thanks for doing that, to participate in that. And let's go ahead and talk about some additional aspects here of the other third leg of the stool that we're talking about, and that is records and information management. Now, if you're in RIM, of course, this is going to be old hat stuff to you. You know about this, but I'll try to keep this part brief, and we'll get on to how these really converge together. But just my summary take on records management is just that it's about managing your stuff. It can be physical stuff, it can be electronic stuff, but really it's about knowing what important stuff you have, making sure that you know where it's at and can access it. So it kind of ties into that accessibility thing we talked about before, but also tracking who's had it, who needs it, so the whole circulation process as well. Making sure only the right people get to see it. So that ties into other things we've already talked about with regard to confidentiality and security. And of course, getting rid of stuff when it's expired. That's the core of the the retention side of things. And holding on to stuff when needed. So applying retention holds to make sure if it's coming up for litigation or if it's under audit, that you don't get rid of it too soon. So these are all part and parcel of records management if you've been in that business at all, but it's just in case there are people in, say, cyber or privacy who don't know about some of the RIM details. I wanted to make sure we covered that as well. And it is pretty simple, but there's a lot of nuance, of course, in that. If we look at a more formal definition, the records and information management according to the generally accepted records keeping principles, if I've got GARP correct, use an acronym too long and you forget what it stands for, but you can see that it's got a number of different things that are probably starting to look familiar there. But some of the must-haves when it comes to records and information management would include things like an information inventory. So that can be a physical inventory, it can be an electronic or digital inventory of what you have. So you want to get rid of the the stuff that, or you not get rid of it, but understand what you have in terms of data and avoid the dark data. But also classifying it. So whenever you find it, you also have to determine kind of what bucket that falls into in terms of records classification. And of course, having a retention schedule. So once you've classified it, you can then apply the rules to say we keep this for this number of years and that for that many number of years, maybe this permanent, and you define what those rules are according to that content. And then role-based access rules. You have to know who can see those different types of content based on their role. And then having access and disposition workflow. So access meaning who can see it, how they're going to get it. If it's going to be physically delivered, you've got to have workflow for that in terms of circulation. And then, of course, if you're going to dispose of it, you have to have approval workflows, sign-offs, certificates of destruction, things of that nature. So those are all must-haves as far as that process goes. But as you can see, some of these things are converging already. For example, we talked in the beginning about CIA. And so here we have compliance, integrity, accountability. And then I didn't highlight these in the PowerPoint, but in the privacy discussion, transparency, we kind of talked about data protection, and then of course you're retaining as minimal as possible in the privacy world, and getting rid of things whenever possible. So already just in that list, you can see that these all overlap with those other disciplines as well. So let's talk more about those intersections. This is really kind of the bread and butter of what we're getting at. So we've been building up to, this argument as far as how these things intersect. So if we start with the, oh, go ahead. Will.
I just wanted, I think it bears repeating, emphasizing just how closely aligned, how much overlap there is between your GARP, your generally accepted record keeping principles, your FIPS, for data privacy, and the CIA triad for cybersecurity. I mean, they are all getting at the same things and supporting the same missions. So important to recognize that alignment, that RIM, cybersecurity, and privacy are more aligned than we often think.
Exactly. That's what we're talking about. We want to make sure and highlight that to bring it to light. So yeah, so just in this top section here about cybersecurity, the first part I want to highlight here are the ways that these different disciplines are different, that they're distinct from the other ones. Although, some of these might be a stretch because you could always find ways that they connect. But in the cybersecurity world, as we talked about before, the focus is on threat detection, incident response, managing the assets to make sure they're patched and up to date, secure development, and generally minimizing the attack surface, the ways that the bad guys can get in and can impact things. So those are all really kind of unique to the cybersecurity realm. And when it comes to privacy, maybe Will, you can highlight those things that are kind of unique to that realm.
Well, I think, again, it's just important to stress that, especially with privacy, that there's so much more that fits in the middle of that Venn diagram than falls outside of it that's truly unique to privacy. One thing to highlight with privacy is your purpose specification, the idea that you're only collecting the data you've disclosed you'll collect, and for the purposes that you've disclosed, and then using it only for those purposes, and as soon as that purpose is accomplished, you'll dispose of it. But again, that still implicates cybersecurity and RIM, and especially retention and disposition practices so much. So it's kind of hard with privacy to really point out the areas that fall completely outside of those other two realms. But
it does highlight the fact that we can't apply the just in case rule when it comes to privacy, right? It's been the long-standing practice of many in the data management world. It's like, well, I got to keep this because it just might be useful someday.
Yeah, that is a and that's while a long-standing practice in the RIM world, I think we're getting further, and privacy has helped accelerate that. That's become more mainstream in RIM, that even when you're not dealing with personal information, that the just-in-case rule should be replaced by the data minimization and disposition rule, that you should not hold on to information regardless of its type, just in case, because there's still risks. And in that situation, the risk typically outweigh any potential benefit. So it's important to look at those practices carefully and assess really what is our need for this. And if there isn't a compelling need, usually the benefits of disposing of it far outweigh the benefits of retaining it. But yes, with privacy for sure, that risk is, and with respect to sensitive personal information, that risk is very highly elevated. Contrary to FIPS and every data protection law on the book, that you can't. You'll get into legal and regulatory problems by subscribing to the just-in-case rule when it comes to privacy and personal data.
So you have to say to the marketing team, no, you can't have that just in case you want to use it for marketing research. We have to have some rules about that, or the faithful employee who says, I've kept every email since 1992, so that in case I need to search that I can. It's like, no, that doesn't work anymore. We have to have some rules around that. So similarly, I tried to think about things that fell uniquely into the records management realm. And again, these have crossovers, but some of the things that are unique in terms of the business processes, things like retention scheduling, management of the circulation of records, checking things in, checking them out, even if it's electronic information. Applying retention holds is a big part of it. Managing the chain of custody so that when it moves from one place to another, you can track who's had it, who's seen it, all of those kinds of details. So again, it was a little bit of a difficult exercise to try and come up with the areas where they're different, because they do all cross over so much. And that's why in this last part, we've kind of highlighted those areas that are the crossover, where they all intersect. So in every case, we're talking about needing to know what you have and who owns it. So having an inventory of your data, your physical records, all of the private information, and assigning ownership to that so you can make sure that people are responsible for it. And of course, data protection, that's been throughout our conversation so far. Access control, that's a no-brainer. We've got to make sure we only have the right people accessing it. We didn't talk a lot about auditing and logging, but that's a big part of cybersecurity, privacy, records, in terms of having independent auditors double check if your processes are working well, if you are securing things the way that you should. Logging can come into play in cybersecurity in terms of the systems that look for anomalies in the logs to see, like, hey, is there someone that's trying to log in 1,000 times per second, indicating a potential breach. Those kind of things are part and parcel to the cybersecurity realm. Obviously, information classification, that's usually thought of in terms of records, but we have to do that for privacy to know which elements to protect because they're PII. We have to do it for cybersecurity because we have to know what the risk level is of that information and protect it accordingly.
And Warren,
yeah.
Don't mean to interrupt, but I just wanted to briefly go back to your point on auditing and logging, and just highlight that in data privacy, so much of that is being able to show your work, show compliance, and so making a record of how you've thought through some of these data privacy issues, your processing impact assessments, and being able to show, exactly, thinking about the risks and then documenting that you've thought about the risks, so that you can show to your compliance folks and outside regulators that you've been extremely thoughtful and careful, being able to document how this information has flown through your system and keeping a record of the fact that you're regularly disposing. So yeah, just auditing or highlighting the fact of how big auditing how big a role auditing plays in data privacy.
And like you said, keeping a record. So there we go, records management, keeping a record of what you're doing in privacy and cyber, that's a record, you've got to keep that.
In contrast to preserving that information longer than necessary, we're
yes.
specifically
right, which kind of is the next
more
two bullets
metadata than the underlying personal data. Don't confuse the two.
Exactly right. But like you said, making sure that you retain the data long enough, but you also delete the data, before it's, becoming a risk to you in terms of privacy, leaks and such. And I think we can't underscore enough that third from the bottom bullet there, the data minimization. You've mentioned that in a previous blog post as well, and I kind of latched onto that and threw it into the slide deck, and that is minimizing data where you can, not only for the purpose of the privacy protection, but if you think about it in terms of cybersecurity, it really is kind of that minimizing of the attack surface as well, because the less data you have, the less can be breached, the less you have to worry about classifying, the less you have as risk, not knowing what's out there. So it really does become a primary consideration when you think about, it used to just be, well, just make sure you've got it so we can retain it, so we can access it at some point, but that's just really no longer the case.
And Warren, perhaps you can comment more on the role of cybersecurity in data minimization and the idea of their role in ensuring that the data has truly been deleted and not we think it has been. It may not have.
I mean, there's a specific guidelines when you delete data. If you need to do a secure delete, there's different standards for how many times you wipe the data off the disk, because even if you go to your Windows file system and you delete a file, there's still residual data there. You're really just getting rid of the header of a file. You're not getting rid of the underlying data. So there are tools in place that can wipe the underlying data to make sure it's filled in with ones or zeros, and make sure that it's completely gone. And so there's different levels of protection of, like, overwriting it 7 times to make sure that it's completely gone. So yeah, lots of things that you can do in terms of ensuring that it's completely deleted. But of course, that all ties into risk management and legal compliance, which of course affect all 3 of those disciplines. So we've probably beat that one up enough at this point. I think it's obvious, how much those do converge. But that kind of leads us into one other sort of side topic that's popular now. What about AI? How does this play into it? And a quick point that most of what we call AI is still machine learning for the most part. So machine learning, to put it succinctly, is really about training algorithms to do really high-level complex pattern matching. But you're having to basically filter it through multiple algorithms, give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down as to whether it matches what you're looking for, and so the machine is kind of learning based on your feedback. True AI is where the machine and the algorithm is actually learning on its own based on its own feedback mechanism, and that's kind of the next level of things. But I think most of what we're dealing with right now is still more in the machine learning category than AI, but there are certainly some exceptions to that. And so some of the aspects of this that pertain to what we're talking about, it's really already quite prevalent in cybersecurity. So when it comes to filters for your email system to filter out spam, that's using AI to a certain degree, or machine learning at least, as well as detecting anomalies. So looking for patterns that can be suspect, and highlighting the anomalies to say this might be a potential breach. All that's being done currently. It is used in privacy-defined PII. I wouldn't say extensively, at least from what I've seen, but definitely it is being used. But probably more so in terms.
More so and for quite some time used in the processing of personal information and creating additional personal information, insights about people's footprints.
Yeah, exactly. And it is sort of emerging in the use in RIM in terms of classification, auto classification, discovering what content is out there in the dark data, and helping you to kind of sort out one type of content from another. So it's kind of got some things happening there. But I would say it's going to be a must for all 3 categories, because there's just too much information for us to manually sort things out. We will have to adopt AI tools and techniques in order to apply that analysis to the amount of data that's being generated. And I will say that here at Zasio, we are actively involved in the research and development in this area. Too soon to give you dates and details, but we definitely have some things happening in that realm, so you can kind of stay tuned, and we'll be sharing some more in later discussions. So let's do one more poll as we kind of wrap things up here. just to get one more piece about the AI use. I'm kind of curious to see how much AI is being used in your own environment. And so I'll let you kind of quickly answer that one. And we'll do a wrap-up slide here. All right. So far, this is kind of falling where I thought it might. And we're almost here to majority. I'll give it 4 seconds. Get plenty of participation. All right, we're just about up to that 70% mark, which is what I like to get to. So let's go ahead and close that, and I will share with you the results. All right, so yeah, I kind of figured it might be in that lower category where it's being explored, it's being discussed, but it's not really in play yet. But I see that we do have quite a number actually, that are changing their policies. And it's being used to analyze, and in some cases, it's a major factor. So yeah, interesting stuff. It's always interesting to know kind of how that is playing out in the real world. Okay, so one last slide here, and just to kind of wrap up what it is that we have discovered in our discussion of cybersecurity, privacy, and records. What conclusions can we draw from this? And to highlight these here, I think the main thing is to really focus on not having the silos, because it's no longer just IT that does cybersecurity or just compliance that does privacy. It's not a basement activity that does records. These all have to work together in order to make this work effectively. And that kind of plays into the next part, which is having less duplication of work, less duplication of resources, because as you saw, there's a lot of convergence. You can utilize the same tools, the same lists of inventories and things like that for the different areas, and make sure that you kind of make all of that information more accessible and effective. And that kind of ties into also sharing the compliance load. So you talked about audits and risk management, all of those types of things. So you can share that load, so it's not just all falling on one team. And then, of course, this is all about risk management. That really is the summary of it. So if you are working with the risk department, you can highlight these things where your area of expertise falls into those categories as well. And then maybe, Will, you can talk about sort of what that looks like in the real world in terms of how this might impact different organizations.
You brought up the bullet of making sure each function has a seat at the table. I like to think of it more as it's a bench. It's a picnic table with a bench rather than everybody having their own individualized seats. It's a bench that includes the range of these issues, and nobody is assigned to any one particular spot, but you might occupy a different part of the bench depending on what day it is and what your objective is. So ensuring that everybody's there, but also recognizing that you're no longer confined to a particular niche, that RIM professionals should have a baseline understanding of what cybersecurity is, what its goals are, how it operates. Is same with privacy and vice versa, so that you're able to cross collaborate more effectively and really accomplish that goal of information governance, of using the information to advance the organization's mission while addressing risks to the greatest extent possible.
Absolutely.
Yeah, something I like to promote is this idea of the 3 domains getting together for tabletop exercising, gaming out scenarios that involve your records, your information, your personal data, and the security practices around that, and responding to incidents together to get a greater understanding of each other's roles and what each needs to do when there's been either a lapse of integrity, you've had a server system go down and need to recover that in order to provide your services, or there's been a breach, and talking about the role of each in the response, perhaps RIM ensuring that accessibility and integrity are restored from backup, cyber doing the investigation and containing the risk, and your privacy where personal data is involved, going over the notification obligations. So something to think about, getting together and working through some of these difficult scenarios together to build trust and greater understanding, and then operability for when a situation happens that requires a coordinated response between all three domains. And Warren, perhaps you could add some insights about sharing budgets where practical to accomplish some of these goals, because I know especially in legal, resources are limited, so it's
Yes.
helpful to be able to think creatively and use some of the monetary resources available for some of these other functions to accomplish your goals and your shared goals.
Yeah, I think about this in terms of like the tools that you might have to purchase, whether it's software or otherwise. You might be able to get a tool, whether it's content management or retention management, where you can use one tool to cover a few different things. Like in our retention schedule management software, we can do system mapping, and we can also add privacy details. And so you might have a tool that can be used in multiple disciplines and not have to have a separate tool in each one. Or at least carve out portions of each tool to work with the other in order to share that burden as well.
Yeah, we've touched on this a bunch.
I think so, yeah.
Ensuring getting together to ensure that minimization is happening both on the front end and the back end.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then just the greater point of this whole conversation, that we should break down silos and promote trust, collaboration, communication, and awareness with respect to the three domains.
Yeah, I think one area that might be highlighted there is like when you're developing processes. Let's say you have a process for onboarding new software. Make sure you're including, and right now everybody has to include cybersecurity and IT, but make sure you're including the privacy considerations, the records management considerations, retention. Does the system that you're implementing have retention capabilities? Those are kinds of questions that you want to make sure and ask. And similarly, when you're offboarding or shutting down a system, do you have a plan for deleting the data to make sure that it's properly deleted and that's audited and that's logged and all of those good things that we do in records management. So great. With that, well, we thank you for being a good audience and participating. We've got just a couple minutes for questions in case there are people who have had questions come up. So Jerry, do we have some that are anxiously awaiting to answer some questions?
Yeah, we have a question here. What metrics or success stories resonate with executives when discussing records management and retention?
I can start with that, and Warren, maybe you can fill in with your ideas.
Sure.
The first thing that always comes to mind is sharing stories of what happens when you get crosswise with regulators in terms of your records management obligations, the fines that are associated with poor retention and disposition practices. But that's been talked about for a while. I think the other area to explore is just how much good RIM hygiene does to create efficiency within your organization when you have good retention, accessibility, and disposition practices. People spend less time being frustrated trying to access and use your information, and more time, accomplishing the goals that they were hired to accomplish. And so it makes for just a happier and more efficient workplace. And so being able to measure that, time saved, not scouring repositories for documents and coming up short, and measuring.
Or reproducing documents that you already created before, but now you can't find.
Excellent point. So something to highlight that I think will go a long way with executives that have heard the warnings about fines and regulatory consequences.
Yeah, that all ties into knowing what you have and where it's at, and how long does it take for you to respond to a privacy request, a records request. If you have a breach, how long does it take to figure out what's been impacted in terms of the the data that has been compromised. All of those things. When it comes to crunch time, you're going to really be thankful if you know those details about what you have and where it's at, who owns it, and who's got access to it. I know that we're at the top of the hour here, so if you've got additional questions, we can answer those by email. So we will take those that have been logged and follow up with those who have asked those. And thanks so much, Will, for collaborating with me on this. And
thank you, Warren. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks, Jerry. Have a good
Absolutely.
day, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.